Good afternoon, everybody. I trust you can all hear me. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Khadija Patel. I'm the journalist in residence at the International Fund for Public Interest Media. Huge thanks to the Wits Centre for Journalism for arranging this webinar. At a hugely important time, I feel, for journalism around the world. But I wanted to begin by telling you a little bit about the International Fund. We are a multilateral financing mechanism for media in low and middle income countries. In Africa, we have invested across South Africa, Namibia, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Ghana, Kenya, and several other places, but also we work in Lebanon. And it's through our work in Lebanon that we've come across Dr. Abu Hamdan, who will be telling us a little bit more about his work and the fantastic potential of sound and its use in investigative journalism. So I don't want to talk a lot more, but I'll hand over to Lawrence. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you.
It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure. Let me start this. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be speaking with you. And to be in touch with IFPIM also, it's a great honor. And of course, to speak to South African investigative journalism and journalist practitioners. You know, your countries now have become synonymous with the heroic deeds of returning hope to human rights and the production of truth across the world. So today I'm going to be talking about the organization I started about 1.5 years ago. It's called Earshot. And as Khadija explained, Earshot is actually the world's first not-for-profit organization to use sound in defense of human rights and to use sound to produce environmental advocacy as well. So we try to counter state and corporate violence and criminal actors. And we do that with novel and pioneering ways, which is the use of sound. For years, the soundtrack in open source videos and videos circulating in the open source has been ignored. And though satellite and visual imagery has got so much more, and visual investigation analysis has become so much more sophisticated, the soundtrack has been overlooked. And we were kind of couldn't have come at a time where that sort of corrective course couldn't have been more useful. Specifically in one of our largest investigations I'm talking about today, which would be the Hind Rajab case, which was really a case where sound was the only source of evidence. And in fact, many of you may have been reading about Saidnaya prison, the release of Saidnaya prison. That why I worked on in 2016 with Amnesty International, well before I established Earshot. And that was also a kind of watershed moment to show what sound can do in the absence of other forms of evidence. What you had there is a lot of people, no international observers, a lot of people who had felt and felt the full violence of Saidnaya, who had escaped or who had been released. And when they entered and exited, they were blindfolded, and when they were inside the prison, they were kept in the dark or in one cell. So their primary experience was acoustic testimony, was an ear witness testimony. And I worked with 5 of those survivors, or 6 of those survivors in 2016 to produce the Human Slaughterhouse Report for Amnesty International. And I'm delighted to see the sort of, that place has become liberated. And that finally sound isn't the only source of evidence that will be leaking out of that place. There will be all kinds of documents and that. But just to really kind of put you in the picture of where and how sound can really be important and why it should not be overlooked. And during the first year of our operations, Earshot has been cited in more than 30 major news stories by leading media outlets such as Jazeera, Washington Post, Le Monde, New Yorker, on TV channels like ITV, Channel 4, Sky News. Earshot has been part of 4 major advocacy campaigns for organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Forbidden Stories. And our work has been submitted in evidence in 2 jurisdictions. And even in one case, our audio ballistic analysis was presented at the United States Congress. So that is to say that in another way, that collaboration is essential for what we do, and that we are really a part of an ecosystem of journalists, human rights defenders, and we kind of often become a vital bit of a missing piece in a jigsaw puzzle across many investigations and contexts. We give lectures, we train journalists. We trained journalists recently at the New York Times to learn the basics of audio and how audio can help them in basic audio open source intelligence can help them in their investigations. Since we started on social media, our videos have collectively garnered more than 19 million views. And really what we aim to do is produce a very comprehensive and compelling set of visuals that accompany our investigations, which differentiate us from other experts in the fields. We don't just want to be a line in a news article. We want you to be able to click on that line and really figure out how we did it. And do that in the most simple and inviting terms that we can, because we don't want to be the only person doing this. We want to establish this as a field that many people can be doing and practicing. So, so it's been a success. There's been challenges, but it's been a great success. And I will tell you now, walk you through a couple of the cases we've been working on over the last year, and finish with one case where sound is not only the kind of evidence or helping out one of the journalists, but it's really about sound itself, and that's really where sometimes sound is what helps you to tell the story, and sometimes the story is sound itself, and we try and focus on both those, keep a keen ear on both of those ways of working and ways of telling stories and getting the truth out. So, I said more than half of those 19 million views I described earlier came from one story, which was our biggest story to date, working with Al Jazeera fault lines on the murder of Hind Rajab and her family in Gaza City last February. Our findings were the most definitive of any investigation that came before and after. As I said, without somebody focusing on audio, this case would have been very difficult. It was the only evidence was really the sound of the conversation between Hind and Leanne, her cousin, and the emergency services that was recorded. Earshot's analysis in corroboration with witness statements and visual analysis shows that it was highly likely that Leanne Hamadeh was shot by the Israeli army at close range between 13 and 23 meters away. In fact, the whole family was shot. In the final moments, we hear a total of 64 gunshots fired in just 6 seconds. The gun is firing these shots is firing at a range of 750 to 900 rounds per minute. And this range exceeds the type of an AK type rifle that's commonly associated with Hamas, but it is consistent with Israeli army issued weaponry such as the M4 assault rifle or the FN Mag machine gun on a Merkava tank. Now, a little bit about audio ballistics, how we did this. When a recording device is in the line of fire, okay, you will hear the 2 sounds that are associated with gunfire. Now you can see them in this image. What happens is the bullet is traveling at supersonic speeds and it's producing this supersonic shockwave. And that sounds like a crack, like a whip cracking, like ta. And then after that, you will hear this sound, which you see circle. This is the sound emanating from the combustion coming out of the muzzle of the gun. And that sound is not traveling at supersonic velocity, it's traveling at the speed of sound, which depending on the temperature that day is anywhere around 340 meters per second. So you can take those 2 speeds. If you know or the speed of the bullet, which is often known because of certain kinds of weaponry that is used by, and certain kinds of caliber weaponry and ammunition that's used by militaries, you can actually use those two data points to figure out how far away a shooter is from a position. Now, in this case, we could use those two sounds to figure out the distance of the shooter. Seconds before, Hind and Leanne, when she's speaking to the emergency services, she says, they are firing at us, the tank is next to me. They're firing at us, the tank is next to me. Now, as you can see, as I just explained, the gap between the supersonic bullet impact and the muzzle blast was as short as 24 milliseconds apart and 40 milliseconds later. Now, that can range, vary depending on the trajectory of the bullet. But it gave us a very tight range around the vehicle, which we knew the shooter was positioned. And what we could do with that is use then the visual analysis of all of the holes that were made in the car. We had a lot of pictures of the Kia after the fact. And we could try to predict the most likely position of the tank according to those bullet marks, bullet holes. This was the most likely position. This is the view from the Kia to the tank. It's just at that distance. It became indisputable that the tank would not know there were children and innocent civilians inside the tank at the time of the shooting after our investigation was launched. Of course, to great silence from the Israeli and American armed forces and responsible parties. Another thing about this case is that though on one hand it proves the necessity of our work because sound is so important to it, it was also, there was a deep feeling, it was a bittersweet feeling after we released it because both the children, Leanne and Hind, who were alive speaking to the emergency services, said that the tank was next to them. They said that they were firing. And yet it took all our work and months of hard, listening to these gunshots and an analysis of hours of tape in order for the world to actually hear them and take them seriously. We had to corroborate those statements, but in a better world, perhaps you wouldn't need us to do this work and you would have actually heard them for what they were saying in the first place. Yet it took our work to turn them from dismissed kind of victims, sort of tragic victims who were dismissed as kind of people who could report on their surroundings. It took our work confirming what they said to turn them into witnesses, so turning them from victims to witnesses. And that was really an important thing, but kind of heartbreaking at the same time. Now, a lot of what we do for journalism and for journalists is sound authentication. We do a lot of work to authenticate materials that are coming out to make sure they haven't been edited. And sometimes this is groundwork for journalists because they don't know, if they've sourced their material from, wherever they've sourced it from, they want to know it's not edited. At some point, we're working with a group in India who were worried that actually they were being purposely fed a bad edited material in order to be caught later in the act of kind of journalism, as it were. So kind of like in bad faith they were given evidence. This is actually one way we do it. We use the electromagnetic interference that's often present on these recordings. Sometimes it's very audible. Sometimes it's actually above the audible spectrum. You don't hear it. You have to sort of see it on spectrographs and stuff like that. Here you could hear it very clearly. I want you to pay attention to these high-pitched clicks. This was actually a case where they were trying to confirm if Samuel Leto, the famous football player from Cameroon, was involved in a corruption case. And what we could see, they claimed that the video was edited. We could show it was not, because each of these clicks happened at very precise 80 millisecond intervals. and they happen throughout the recording. Even when they're not present, they return in the multiples of 80 milliseconds. And so that's one way you can sort of start to verify whether or not recordings were edited or things were added in as they claim, because should something be added in, you would more likely find irregular breaks in that electromagnetic interference. You wouldn't find it continuous, as it were, in a overall recording. Now, this is one way of trying to protect oneself. Of course, you have to look at all possibilities, but this gives journalists some confidence in what they're looking at is real, and that's a big part of what we do at Earshot. So it's not only audio ballistics, it's also to do with this. Now, this is another case we authenticated for Al Jazeera. This was a video that was circulated supposedly showing a doctor describing Hamas attacking Al-Shifa hospital. It was circulated widely and on official Israeli media channels. And we were asked to evaluate the recording, see if there's anything that we could say was fake about it. Now, if any of you are Arabic speakers, you may already know that it sounds very bad, her pronunciation. However, we don't work in linguistics. We just work in sound, so that's not our area of expertise. We cannot speak to it, or even if intuitively I feel as an Arabic speaker, she is faking her accent. But anyway, we can look at the facts, the acoustic facts in the room.
Ya Allah,
so this is the recording.
I can't believe I'm doing this, but the world has to know what Hamas is making here. They're taking over the entire hospital. They're taking over the fuel, the medicine. I have nothing to treat with. I have nothing to treat with. I have to fix a fracture.
So
I have nothing to treat with.
I want you to pay attention. She says medicine
to fix a fracture.
And treat with.
I have
There is
to
a
treat with.
resonant frequency in the room that's activated by her voice.
To fix a fracture. I have nothing to treat with.
You see? It activates a resonant frequency in the room, which means the room is resonant. That's the innate resonant frequency of that space she's speaking in.
I have to fix
Yet the explosion that happens behind her
I have nothing to treat with.
has a totally different acoustic profile. It doesn't activate that frequency at all. And if that explosion was happening in that room, it would be most pronounced at that same register of frequency, which the room is naturally amplifying.
I
So
have
listen
nothing
again.
to treat with. I have to fix a fracture.
Do you hear the difference between the spaces in which the
nothing to treat
explosion
with.
happens and her voice?
I have to fix a fracture. I have nothing to treat with. I have to fix a fracture.
This, for us, this is the nerdy stuff we really get into. But we could show there that, in fact, the explosions had all been added on afterwards. They are not continuous with the space in which she is speaking. Those are not explosions happening at the same time of recording. They had been added on. And so left further questions about the kind of fabrication of this video, the reliability of it as a source. Now, what we also do is a lot of work on drones.
Ya Allah.
Before I started Earshot, I did a big project called Air Pressure, which really look at the use of drones in Lebanon. This was a case we were looking into the Israeli strike that killed the journalist or the cameraman Issam Abdallah at the very beginning of the war. What we found there was quite interesting. Now, what we knew already is that a drone is loudest at the rear of the plane. The engine is at the rear. If a drone is facing away from you and driving, its engine is going to be pointing directly at you. It's going to be at its loudest. Now, that's important to bear in mind because we had two details in this recording, in this video. So basically, these lines are the drone moving in and out, further away from the camera. As of course, this is a Doppler effect, right? as a sound source moves closer, the sound waves are compressing and the pitch is rising. As it moves further away, it is decompressing, and there's more distance between each wave, and that is getting longer again. It's getting lower again, literally longer in terms of the longitude of the frequency. So what you're seeing here is the rising and falling, undulating pitch of this drone. So we know it's moving toward and away from the camera, right, throughout this recording by this undulation. Now, there's another detail that we could use, which is that when you see this line is at its brightest, that's when the sound is at its most intense, its most loudest. So that doesn't happen, if you see, when the drone is at its closest, right? It doesn't happen, sorry, when the drone is at its highest pitch. It's not when it's compressing. In fact, the pitch is already descending, and you can see that it's already descending when the engine turns to face the camera and it gets louder. Now you're seeing this pattern, right? These two contending patterns of one of intensity and one of pitch, right? And they're not showing the same thing. They're not, well, as it's getting closer, it's not getting louder, right? It's getting louder as it turns away. So using those two data points, we could actually reconstruct how that drone was moving, knowing that the loudest point is at the rear of the vehicle. So you can see as it cycles away, you can see it's at its lowest here as it starts to move closer to the camera, right? And then it's closest to the camera there, but it's loudest there as the engine turns to face it. And again, it's at its furthest from the camera as it starts to turn back. We get it really quiet because the engine is at its furthest away from you. It's pointing completely opposite way and away. And we could find that that cycle happened around that camera 11 times in the 20 minutes before Issam Abdullah was killed. So what does that mean? How did that help this advocacy campaign and Amnesty International? It helped by being able to say that there was ample evidence to see that these were journalists and not military combatants that were being hit. That there was continuous surveillance that was circling that camera's position for at least 40 minutes and definitely 11 times in the 23 minutes before he was killed, before the trigger was pulled and the journalists were hit. So this became, again, the most sort of the strongest bit of evidence that there was knowledge that these, or that there could have been, or there was the potential certainly for that knowledge to be there, and they could not claim ignorance that these were military targets or not journalists. Now, as I said before, and this is the last point, I will leave you on this story, because I'm eager to get into question and answer. We'd also developed tech and tools, and this is one of the things that we've been working on. As I said before, sometimes sound is the evidence that helps the story, and sometimes the story is about sound itself. 2023, political unrest broke out across the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. It was on a scale nobody had seen in more than 40 years. The unrest centered around planned construction of 31 of the largest land-based wind turbines on the last remaining open space for the occupied Julanis who have lived under military occupation since 1967. Some of the 256-meter turbines are to be built just 35 meters away from Julani homes. 35 meters. The Julani protest against this wind farm began in 2019 in the wake of the announcement of the wind turbine project, which went hand in hand with Trump's policy for the US to officially recognize these lands as belonging to Israel. The protest movement has been so forceful because the very future of the Julani community is at stake. These turbines will not only generate an enormous amount of noise that will pollute the landscape, but it will also create a sonic annexation, because these will create an acoustic footprint of 16 square kilometers. It will restrict the expansion of Julani villages and towns and farms and separate this community from its land. For all the social impact and displacement they will cause, these 31 wind turbines will provide a meager 0.6% of Israel's energy needs. Recognizing the indiscriminate nature of the noise generated by these wind turbines and the ways in which this noise will occupy space, disrupt communal networks, and fracture social fabric of the community, Earshot worked closely with Al Marsad, a local human rights organization, to create a tool with two objectives. This is the tool you're seeing now being played. It's a video game simulation. Now the two objectives, one is to support the Julanis in contesting the construction of this wind farm, and the other is to serve as a site to preserve the memories of the acoustic landscape before it is taken from them. Do you hear me above the sheep or not? The most effective way to combine these objectives is to create a video game simulation of the site. Players and stakeholders will be able to move around the map of the area and hear the impact of the noise from these turbines on the community from any point within the proposed site. The negative social impact can also be registered here, not only through the propagation of noise generated by the turbines, but also through the player's ability to effectively listen to a library of geolocated field recordings from the area through the noise. For now, the simulation of this place, this simulation is the only place where we can turn on the turbines. But in the future, it will be the only place where they can be turned off. And that will be the only place that will allow the vibrant sonic life underneath to be heard. So we've been field recording and geolocating these recordings of the Golan Heights across this site as a way to preserve the the community, the sounds that were there before these massive wind turbines are enforced on them. Now, some of those recordings are sounds of nature, jackals at night, sheep and farms. I mean, here now you hear turbines. So you hear off before. I'll just show you off. Here you go, off. That's gone. And here, this is somebody's home here that we've mapped. So the idea, we've recorded the sounds of all kinds of things that really we're really showing that sound is an adhesive force that binds communities. And some of the recordings are very literally like that. There's people who, when a wedding happens or is due to happen, people drive through these villages and towns with loudspeakers on top of the cars, inviting everyone to the wedding, right? So literally, bonds are cut. You'll no longer hear the wedding announcements. You'll no longer hear the jackals. The bonds between each other, the land, and all these things will be cut by the kind of imposition of this mass of noise on top of these people's homes. Now, to calibrate the simulation and ensure its accuracy, the noise generated by the wind turbines, we recorded the noise generated by wind turbines in Geldorf, Germany, which is the only place in Europe where these massive 256-meter high turbines are erected. Usually turbines around 160 meters tall. These are really huge. Measurements were taken of how the noise propagated across the landscape, how the frequencies of the noise decayed as it dissipated from the rotor's core. And these recordings were then digitally convolved into the topography of the Golan Heights. To simulate how these turbines will affect the Julani environment, not only in terms of sound pressure, but also in terms of social impact, these extensive field recordings were made over the course of a year. We worked with Julani composer and sound artist Khadija Patel, who contributed more than 50 field recordings of the sounds of local life captured in the communion between people and their land, animals and thunderstorms to social gatherings. Combining the recordings and measurements from Germany with Khadija Patel's recording, this video game simulation allows one to virtually walk the land and hear the turbines will sound like from anywhere on the map, whether in a remote area of the landscape or from homes and farms. And here actually what you're seeing is the first presentation we did of this to the community. So they would actually control and tell us, go here, go to my farm, go there. And this will be released to them in order to advocate and fight against the construction of these turbines in the new year. It's something that they can use and take to lawyers and take up lawsuits and advocate against for their interests. Oops. Right. Now, in this wind turbine project, some wind turbines will be placed as close as 35 meters away from homes. By contrast, the nearest residents in Geldorf, Germany, live 5 kilometers away and claim that on gusty days they can still hear the distant whirring. On a very calm day with a wind speed of around 5 knots, a turbine generates around 70 decibels of noise. This is as loud as the noise from a busy road or an airplane flying overhead. At a distance of 0 to 400 meters, the wind turbine will be the loudest source of noise in the area and will still be clearly audible up to 1 kilometer away. In 1967, only 7,000 Julanis were not forcibly displaced to neighboring Syria. The burden of those who remained was to preserve and protect the memories of those who had been expelled and the vanished villages and homes that had disappeared since the war. Now, where an untrained eye may now look at this landscape and see beautiful green empty space, the Julanis see sites where villages, homes, and farms once stood. Where an untrained eye might see open and untouched nature, the Julanis see erasure. In this video game simulation that I showed you before, we can switch the turbines on and off, and we'll hear the industrial noise of their whirring, creaking, and swooshing overlay a pristine and natural silence. But this landscape was never meant to be a quiet place. For the years that remained on this land after 1967, this quiet remains loud with the voices of the disappeared. This quiet of this place is a testimony to the scale of that disappearance, to the many absent voices of the past and their descendants who have a right to claim this land in the future. The noise pollution wrought by these turbines is not simply a disturbance of the peace, but an attack on the memories of war. While it is true that this noise would not split eardrums and cause physical hearing damage, Earshot's findings show that it will permanently divide the community from within and separate people from their land. The wind farm as an Israeli tool of occupation contravene this principle of international law, whereby people have the right to self-determination on their own land. Now, similar to the concepts of economic and territorial self-determination, Earshot advocates for the right to sonic self-determination. And this is the focus of this research project. Land is not only about soil or territory, but also about the less tangible aspects that contribute to the overall experience of the place. Our video game simulation acts as a medium to defend the principle that individuals have the right to decide what noise is made on their land, what noise is allowed, and what sounds define their community. Now, noise is sometimes defined as sound out of place. And this community has resolutely decided that there is no place for the sound of turbines in the Julan. And it is vital that the right of sonic self-determination be upheld in a place where the noise of Israeli and Russian fighter jets, and now today tanks, drones, and Hezbollah missiles already overwhelm the soundscape. In a place where GPS and radio signals are regularly jammed, the noise of the wind turbine become a further sonic obstacle to audibility, another layer of noise that muffles the voices and sounds of the Julan. And that's why I wanted to end with this video here, where we have Julani musician Ahmad Amdah playing his own wind instrument, not a wind turbine, but a saxophone. He's playing it loud and proud from a home that will one day be 35 meters away from one of the loudest wind turbines in the planet. And it's to show that sound is not only a means of evidence, not only a means of repression, and theft and expropriation. It not only comes at times of violence, but at times of joy and resistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. And I'm disappointed that we can't be in the same room with you to actually give you a round of applause because, well, your work is fascinating. And every time I hear more about it, I want to know more and understand more. For those of you who've joined in a bit late, welcome to the webinar. This webinar is hosted by the Wits Centre for Journalism in partnership with the International Fund for Public Interest Media. This is part of our partnership with the African Investigative Journalism Conference. It was the first time that the International Fund partnered with the conference this year. Delighted to have with us the convener of the African Investigative Journalism Conference, Beauregard Tromp here, and he'll lead us in conversation with Lawrence. Over to you, Beauregard.
Thanks very much, Khadija. And Lawrence, thank you so much. I'm such a huge fan of the work that you guys do. And let me state from the outset and be a bit presumptive that with the support of IFPIM, we must have a masterclass on this at the next convening of the African Investigative Journalism Conference. I can imagine, and I'm sure the participants here recognize many of the names of the attendees. I'm sure many of them are itching to get stuck in and apply some of these ideas and projects, tools that you guys are using to their local landscape or regional landscape. You speak about the land, we have, that's at the core of so much, especially for us here in Africa. And we have so many issues there, especially with the exploitation of natural resources, be it mining or otherwise. I don't think many people have taken or given too much thought, enough thought at least, into the effects of sound on our psyche. The project that you guys did, Air Pressure, I think it's a landmark project. I think it's something that many of us can identify with. I want to encourage everybody here to please look at the site where you can see more of the work that Earshot does, earshot.ngo. Is that correct, Lawrence?
That's correct. Thank you for the plug.
I know it's really wonderful. It's very instructive because we always talk about, we want to do things practically. We want to think about practical application of things. And this is what you guys do. I want to just pause briefly and take advantage of my position here. Kunle, I'll come to you and to you, Judith. So Sadnaya prison. Look, obviously it's very topical that is because of the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. And that, of course, that prison is a black hole. And it's something that we can identify with. Many of our countries have these spaces. We know about these kind of spaces where relatives, friends, loved ones disappear. You're scared to inquire about them lest you be arrested yourself and end up in that hole. Can you just briefly speak about that? Because when I say it's a dark hole, it is a dark hole. There's no light. You're devoid of your visual sense. And without saying too much about it, do you just want to speak to people about the space and the work that you guys did there, which I think is so instructive and fascinating?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think this birthed a kind of methodology for me. It, in fact, it was the foundation of building something like Earshot, understanding its necessity in the field. And it must be said that those detainees that I interviewed in 2016, who were representative of the thousands who had been in Saidnaya or similar prisons, or who have been disappeared and killed, taught me how to listen in many ways. They informed my listening. They made me understand. They made me tune my listening to many of these details that you might disregard in the outset, but really understand their significance in a place like that. Specifically in a place where you have sensory deprivation. Now, a lot of people are asking me, will you go to Saidnaya now? You finally can go there, right? No one could go there for years, and all we knew about it was the sounds heard by the people that we interviewed. and the testimonies of people who had been inside. I think what I've always said is that it's not about the building. It's not about. It's about what it was like to be in that building, right? The building was not the evidence, right? What we tried to get out was as much of the experience of being there and what that is. And that, you speak about air pressure and how that's using sound as a means of oppression and terror. That was really informed by what I learned from Said Naya, because there sound is used as a communal source of punishment, right? Sound is not something that behaves neatly to visual boundaries and to walls and doors. It leaks, and the leakage of sound was weaponized in Said Naya. They would beat people in the place where it reverberated the most. A beating against one was a beating against all. Silence was the first thing that people were forced into when they entered Sagnaya. The first thing they were told: you do not speak in Sagnaya. Silence was the breaking of silence was punishable by death. It was fatal, right? It's fatal to speak. People describe coming out of there not being able to use their vocal cords, right? So, there's many things to say about it. But today, I have to kind of gather my thoughts a little differently, in that I saw it break open. I gave up on seeing those images, to be honest with you. And seeing them, and particularly one video really brought me back to those interviews, because there's one video of a guy. They come and they tell him it's free, the regime has fallen, and he doesn't look at them in the face. He looks down and he's in a crouched position. And this is the position that they were forced to be in at any time they had to interface with the guards. They couldn't look at the guards in the face, they couldn't speak, and they had to be in this kind of squatted position. And you see him behaving like that, but to his liberators. It's really heartbreaking that was one of the first videos to see, because of course it verified not only what I had heard in 2016, but what had been ongoing in the 8 years after knowing that was the case, just knowing how brutal that place really was. And you could see, the silence. He wouldn't speak. You could see everything in this video about the way that they were treated. Yeah, I'm delighted that it's fallen. At the same time, our ears since doing that investigation, have turned to the Golan Heights, as you see, and the Golan Heights today has been taken. Basically, tanks have moved in from the Israeli side, and so I'm very careful to make sure that my ears are tuned to both experiences right now. Of course, I'm delighted for those families. I couldn't be happier that the days of Said Naya are over, but we have to see also what's happening to the loss of land, how life is being foreclosed on the other side. So yeah.
So I just want to stick with Naya again, and
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
there's a video of you sitting in the studio with a survivor from there, and you're prompting the person to, what kind of sound, what does that mean? And I thought maybe you could speak to people about that, because I thought that was very clever. Many of us are
Yeah.
not radio journalists, and so we don't listen
Yeah.
for these things all the time. But I mean, in that place, there's so many cues which tell you so many different things, which I found
Yeah.
quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'll tell you one story, and it's a very complex story, because what we realized we were documenting, the more we tried to make a kind of forensic reporting of what was happening there, the more we realized we were documenting sensory deprivation, which includes starvation, right? And how starvation affects the senses. You couldn't take away the experience of Said Naya from Said Naya. It was irretractable, right? And I'll give you a really good example of how that worked. You know, there was one instance where I was trying to find out how far his cell, one of the survivor's cell, was from the main door, or from the end of the door in his wing. And from there, I could work out if he would corroborate other stories that were being told. And, you know, because we needed to kind of gather the stories together to see if two people were in the same wing at the same time, they might have heard the same crime, right? And it would become a stronger bit of evidence the more witnesses we had. So I was trying to figure out where he was in the prison. I was playing the sound of the door, and playing at different intensities. He said, no, it's louder, it's louder. It's getting louder, and I was adding more and more, as I was pumping it up, more and more reverberation was coming. At some point, it was just a massive sound. Like, you know, you couldn't make that sound from a dub sound system. You know, it was huge. And he stopped me and he said, that sound is present inside Naya. And I said, that's the sound of the door? He said, no, that's the sound of bread being dropped outside my cell every morning. And I say, what? You know, like, it's totally be like, what do you mean? There's no, right? The laws of physics tell us this is impossible, right? But we're not dealing with the laws of physics, right? Or we're dealing with a kind of metaphysics. He said, from the sound, I can tell the weight of how much bread is in that package that he dropped, how many slices of bread are there. And I can know how much and if I'm going to eat that day, okay? So you had this 2 points of contention, right? You had on the one hand, he has this immaculate sense of hearing, and many of them had it, right? They were trained, they're there for 3 years in silence. They can hear everything, right? But also, you hear how hunger is totally conditioning his hearing, right? How everything becomes about food, right? And it wasn't the only time that food kind of entered in strange and unusual points in the testimony. So what I'm trying to say is that what we tried to do was get as much information about what was happening inside there, but sometimes you met these points in the testimony, in the story, that you really had to be attuned to, you had to sort of tune yourself distinctly to it, right? Because it wasn't, you know, when he first said it was bread, my first instinct is to say, no, let's get back to the door, right? Because, you know, I wasn't capable of understanding the significance of that moment. And when I watch that scene back, I see the incomprehensibility on my face, my actions, right? Only later did I truly understand what he was saying, what he was explaining to me, that what we were talking about was not the sound of the prison. We were talking about, what we had measured was the sound of hunger, and the sound, you know, the state of hunger in which they were held.
I'm gonna intersperse this with some questions from the attendees over here. Judith asks, would it be possible to know the tools you are working with? Can I add to that question? Surely we all can't outfit a $1 million+ studio and buy all these fancy things, but you know, is it possible to do some of what you guys do with
Of course,
you possibly get?
In fact, again, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You know, it's not that fancy. We try to give fancy. We try to, you know, we work a lot with citizen media, basically, right? Citizen media is, you know, it's the opposite of what police forces have access to, or states have access to, right? We don't use CCTV, we don't have phone records, we don't have body cams often, right? We have citizen media. It's low res, you know, in the case of Hind Rajab, it's recordings of recordings, right? So we try and get that to the highest resolution possible, but we're always working from a position of low resolution, right? And we're very sympathetic to bottom-up practices. And a lot of our tech is not very expensive. What is expensive is, of course, training people and making sure the time, because this is not off-the-shelf stuff that you can learn. This is stuff I've been working with over the last more than a decade, and have to train people up to get there. simply because the stuff you can read on audio forensics is all from state practices, all those things that I described before. Now, what we use is Isotope and the suite that we find that very useful, the Isotope suite, Izotope. That's $200. That's not expensive. Now, our headphones are very expensive, not the ones I'm wearing today. We have a very expensive pair of headphones, but that was also not necessary for doing the groundwork. And I only got those headphones recently as Earshot became really the central point of my life. Before that, I was doing a lot of the groundwork with stuff you can buy also for like 200 something, just good, decent headphones. Now, I do training sessions for journalists in exactly how you can do a lot of the groundwork and a lot of the work in audio. And I do that, and I'll be happy to do that, for you guys at another point in time. I find that really, productive, where I can talk you through exactly how you can apply some of these methods. But the technology isn't expensive. Now, the caveat there is that we have spent the last year and a half developing a lot of tools that you can't get off the shelf because there's nothing really like us that needs this stuff so regularly. We're parasiting onto stuff that's used for mastering and acoustic production and acoustic architecture and stuff like that. But none of it fits the mold perfectly. So we're developing our own custom tools for audio ballistics and for visualizing sound. And we're hoping to make those tools available when and as we can get them. So that's also part of our mandate, to develop tools for the open source and for the journalist community. Yeah.
So I think you've also answered Let's Shun's question. She says that she teaches at the School of Journalism and Media Studies at Rhodes University in the Eastern Cape. And she wants to know where she can read more about these techniques and how to teach them to students. Yeah, I think you've
on our website, you can, as I said before, you can see all of these videos. And we try to be as painfully clear and nerdy about what we've done exactly for those purposes. We actually would like our website, I don't know if it's there yet, we would like our website to be a curriculum on sound investigation, that someone can teach. So please feel free to dig through those videos online. And if anything's unclear, please reach out to us. We can also, help you make it understandable.
The good friend Kunle from Nigeria asks, he says, absolutely genius work. Thank you, Lawrence. I was recently fascinated by tech that allows you to timestamp any recording simply by analyzing electromagnetic interference from nearby power transmission lines. Hummingbird clock, yeah? I want to ask if you have done any work trying to discover if a piece of recording is generated by AI. If not, how easy do you think this might be? Guys, the hummingbird clock, I didn't know about this. I told my sister in London, my mind was blown.
Yeah, I have to say though, we've never used the hummingbird clock effectively. I put it out there as something that I thought we could use. It must be said that I think it's anachronistic already, that a lot of tech isn't really taking those ENF frequencies. What we're doing is a lot of the electromagnetic frequency stuff that I showed you before that authenticate recordings, but they don't tell you a timestamp. About AI, so we're part.
What the hummingbird clock is. I don't think people know about this, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what was described in that question, and you can go to the hummingbirdclock.info and find out more. But basically, the buzz of the electricity mains is never exactly 50 hertz or 60 hertz in the US. It's always cycling around 50 hertz. And it's so random that any 10 seconds will never be produced again, right? That sound of it's fluctuating will never be produced again. So that means if you've archived all of that song of the hummingbird of the humming of the electricity, the song of the humming of electricity, you can potentially say exactly when a recording was made if it has that same pattern of main term on it. again, with the caveat that I put this in the world, I thought it would be useful. This was again around 2014, and we've never got a single request that we could use. But you know, it's there still. Maybe one day it will be revived. Um, Now, what's much more pressing is the second part of the question, which is on AI. Um, and we're part of a group called Deepfakes Rapid Response Force, who is part of an organization which is led by an organization called Witness, who basically elevate things that are flagged by journalists and communities online to see if it is faked, and trying to get an answer within 24 hours before the thing circulates widely. We've successfully done a case like that recently. A lot of it is in Africa, a lot of it's in Uganda, strangely. Uganda and India seem to be a big hubs. I don't know if it's just because of recent elections. It always seemed to be around election times. People are faked saying things. In this case, it was in Maharashtra in India, an election going on there where they'd deep faked a guy talking about cryptocurrency, embezzling crypto, basically. And we could show it was faked because of not because of the voice. The voice was immaculate. The voice was perfect, but because of the breaths between the voice. Now, in the breaths, you had this very strange vibrato effect, right? You wouldn't hear it, but when you looked, when you really zoomed into the sound, you could see that it was cutting on the breath, like a strange vibrato effect. Now, we know that that's a signature mark of synthetic audio, and we've been able to reverse engineer how AI does that, why it does that strange vibrato thing on breath. And we could say that that was faked. Sometimes you don't have it, but we got lucky. You know, it's not on all synthetic audio, but it is a mark of synthetic audio. Now, what I like to say about that case is that we could show that AI still can't breathe. For now.
We've got a question from Hazem Al-Mazuni, who would like to participate in a practical application workshop for these technologies. I think we've spoken about that a bit. Like I said, I'm really hopeful and we'll work towards it. I'll speak to Khadija and Lawrence offline because we really need that masterclass. I feel like the demand will be such that we'll need more than a masterclass because there's so much demand for this. Guys, we're coming to the end here, and unfortunately, I don't think we have time for very much more. But Lawrence, from our side, from the WCJ, and I may not speak in acronyms, from the Wits Centre for Journalism, from the African Investigative Journalism Conference, this has been an incredible pleasure. We had hoped to have you at our conference this year. I swear it is the best conference. We have the most fun. And
I'll be there next year.
No, you must. You will love it. People are eager to learn and to improve the incredible work that they already do. But thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do. It is really inspiring, especially in the state that we find ourselves, especially with the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon. And of course, we'll watch what happens and unfolds in Syria. Khadija?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that we got to do this. Lawrence, thank you so much. I know that we're distracting you from your work today, so we're very grateful that you could make time to speak to us. And we look forward to further cooperation in the coming months.
Certainly. Great. Okay. Goodbye,
Cheers,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you so much. An honor. Bye.